said it's hard to say what it is. There's this emphasis on it being kind of beyond concepts, right? It's kind of unnameable.
Yeah, because it's almost too subtle to be able to just pin it down in a precise formula. And that's, I think, it's one of the things that, to me, you don't have to believe in these ideas. They are almost self-evident in the sense that anything you look at in life works that way. It works as the same formula that you applied in one context may not work in the next context. And it's not a bad formula in the right. It's like, it's having a whole toolbox and each tool works for a particular job. You cannot exchange them randomly. You can, and you can do a maybe okay job at best, but it's not the ideal tool. And, anything in life, if you think about things like parenting, right, raising kids, one kid may need a lot of structure and discipline and may need to be told what to do a lot more and may need a lot. Another kid will go crazy if you do that. And they need more freedom, and you need to give them more trust and give them more room and all of that. And again, it's not that structure and discipline are bad, but it depends on which kid you have in front of you. You cannot apply the exact same model to all of them like it's the same thing.
Right. Yeah. So there's this real emphasis on a kind of adaptation and a kind of bottom up, seeing what needs to be done in this kind of wisdom way, rather than kind of rigid top down like rules, as you say, and I mean, that also fits with the kind of the idea, I think, of this being beyond the rational mind, because the rational mind is all about kind of concepts and communicating in words like this is how everything is. But this seems to be kind of, there's in Taoist traditions, there seems to be a kind of not contempt for rationality, maybe, but pointing to what's beyond rationality.
Yeah, because the way they see it is rationality is a tool, and it's a useful one, but it goes from ear to ear. And then there's life outside of those boundaries where it's just as important, it's just as valid, and where if you try to apply the wrong tool, it's not going to take you very far. I mean, I guess one of the problems of rationality is that the whole idea is based on analyzing data, coming up with principle and conclusion, and draw some kind of actionable course. And Taoism is telling you that's great. However, the context, by the time you have done all that, the context to which you will apply those conclusions may not really be the same one that you use to analyze the data. It's not to say that that's useless, because of course, you can derive some principles that may be generally good and may be helpful, but they are not going to be an exact fit in the next situation. It may require some adaptation. And I think that's one of the things that keep Taoism different from pretty much any other philosophy or religion, in the sense that it doesn't tell you to stick to it. These are our conclusions. This is what you're going to follow all the time. Even when there is a paradoxical element there, because even when it comes to things like absolute rules or laws that Taoism tend to be against, but even they would be, absolute rules are mistaken and they are needlessly rigid, except when they aren't. There's the occasional situation in which an absolute rule is good and you need it. And, even in terms of behavior, a lot of Taoism would be appropriate action is different from context to context. But I don't think you're going to find any Taoist texts that tell you that something absolutely awful in all contexts is a good thing. Like, there is no such thing. You can make an argument that killing people is not a good idea. However, when somebody has a gun to your head in a self-defense scenario or then you can make it. So contextually it changes. However, take something like rape. There is no self-defense rape. You know what I mean? There is no context in which you can spin it around to say, no, but in that context, it was actually. So most of the time, there are no absolute rules, except when there are. And occasionally, Taoism is flexible enough to say, no absolute rules, except for a few cases here and there.
Yeah, it seems to have this ability to kind of even encompass other philosophical traditions that seem counter-Taoist. It seems because of this whole duality thing. It's like, well, perhaps sometimes you need that. Perhaps sometimes you need anti-Taoism. And that could somehow be incorporated within Taoism, which is quite, this brings us to the kind of, I guess paradox might be a good word for it, but I always feel uncomfortable with it because we're talking about things, that obviously we think are really valuable and talking about real truths. And then, paradox can, I think sometimes people think, well, why do you, if it's contradicting itself, it's nonsense. But there's something about when you get close to all encompassing truths of this kind and you try to compress it into language, you do get what seem like paradoxes, right?
And I think that's the difference between paradox and contradiction. The contradiction is just flat out, you take something that clashes with another statement in a way that there's no possible reconciliation. Those are the logical contradiction, or there's a contradiction of like just being hypocritical or something. A paradox is more about putting together things that most people don't think go together. But I think the difference between a paradox and a contradiction is that a contradiction clashes. There is no reconciliation. Whereas a paradox is, it starts with two things that most people don't put together, but somehow it actually works. And I think that's a key difference because it boils down to the results of what is putting together things that most people don't see go together.
Right.
And it's key because I think the way that Taoists view it is that the nature of reality is paradoxical. It's not contradictory, but it's paradoxical. And that's something that's, everybody's different experience, but I can definitely see the logic behind that.
Right. And so on this idea of recognition of the Tao being kind of beyond the rational mind, like with rationality, we can talk about the ideas and it's out there and we can talk about it. But with this, I guess you have to resort to direct experience, right? Like on the one hand, we're talking about big cosmological stuff, but there's this kind of contemplative, meditative aspect to it as well, right?
Definitely. And ultimately it boils down to results. You can talk about principles all day, but at the end of the day is how you apply them and whether they deliver the proper results or not. Taoism has some of the ideas may seem kind of out there and abstract, but it has an extremely pragmatic dimension because the whole emphasis is on producing results at the end of the day. So much of Taoism is this idea of just achieving maximum result with minimum effort. So it needs to deliver maximum result. It cannot just be about principles. It's like, who cares? Does it work or doesn't it at the end of the day? That's pretty much the main thing that counts.